When most people think of explorers, probably Magellan and Columbus come to mind, or maybe some British guys in pith helmets cutting their way through dense jungles. But long before the compass was even invented, peoples of the ancient world were pushing boundaries and charting new lands. So let's take a look at 4 mostly forgotten, but absolutely incredible ancient explorers. So I think it makes sense to start at the very beginning, with history's first record of any explorer at all, Harkhuf of Egypt. Now, we've talked about Harkhuf on this channel before while in search of the lost kingdom of Yam. This ancient Egyptian explorer's journeys are known to us thanks to a detailed inscription on his own tomb. And this also includes a letter to Harkhuf from the grateful pharaoh himself. Now, during the 23rd century BC, Harkhuf led a handful of expeditions far from the banks of the Nile River and toward the interior of Africa. On his first journey, Harkhuf accompanied his father on a trip toward the kingdom of Yam. Now, the location of this kingdom is still very much debated. Libya and northern Chad have both been suggested as possible locations for Yam, among many others. So this first small expedition took 7 months, and Harkhuf returned with a wide array of exotic goods. His tomb inscription says that he was much praised for this accomplishment. Harkhuf then traveled alone on his next journey. He went some distance north into a desert region that had been hardly visited before by Egyptians. And once again, Harkhuf brought back exotic goods, the likes of which had never been seen before in ancient Egypt. Well, at least that's what his inscription says. Now, Harkhuf's third expedition took him back to Yam, and it was an overwhelming success because Harkhuf returned to Egypt with a caravan of over 300 donkeys carrying ebony, incense, panther skins, elephant tusks, and boomerang-like throwing sticks. Harkhuf's last recorded journey took him to Nubia, and it seems that there, Harkhuf encountered a tribe of pygmy people. And he brought a member of that tribe back to the Egyptian royal court. This absolutely thrilled the pharaoh, Pepi II, who was about 8 years old. In return for this, Pepi heaped honors on the explorer and commended his loyalty. This was the crowning achievement of Harkhuf's career, and this was a career in which he established new trade routes, he visited uncharted lands, and he even became a governor. The ancient peoples of the Mediterranean believed the Atlantic Ocean was so massive that it encircled the entire Earth. To sail past the Pillars of Hercules, which is the modern-day Strait of Gibraltar, was to enter the complete unknown. But around the 5th century BC, the date is pretty shaky, a Carthaginian admiral named Hanno did just that. And that's according to a document called the Periplus, which is a Greek copy of an inscription that was made in Carthage commemorating Hanno's voyage. Hanno's expedition was huge, and it took months. He sailed from Carthage with over 60 ships and 30,000 men and women. The fleet rode along the coast of North Africa, and they established colonies and outposts as they went, in modern-day Morocco and Mauritania, among several other places. One of those cities they founded is now known as Tangier. After they passed through the Pillars of Hercules, Hanno's expedition continued into the unknown, heading west and southward, hugging the coast of West Africa the whole way. Even though the account of his voyage is brief, it's loaded with tantalizing details and events. Hanno's fleet camped on the African coast periodically, and they made contact with nomads and reportedly became friends with them. They heard stories of strange men who could run even faster than horses. And then the shrinking fleet pushed inland via the Senegal River, but there they encountered hostile tribes. And at last they camped in what is now believed to be the Niger River Delta. But Hanno and his men became afraid because at night they heard drums all around them. There was music and shouting coming from the jungle, and to cap things off, Hanno's men saw fire shooting out of a mountain. This, they learned, was called the Chariot of the Gods. Now, perhaps this strange sight may have been lava flowing from Mount Cameroon, a volcano still active today. But that's not all the Carthaginians saw. They encountered a fearsome people covered in hair. They were very good at climbing trees and were incredibly strong. Hanno's sailors tried and failed to capture some of them alive. There seems to have been a small conflict between Hanno's men and these hairy folks. Scholars today believe that these were chimpanzees or gorillas. Unfortunately, dwindling provisions forced Hanno to abandon his attempt at further exploration and a possible circumnavigation of Africa. Some have argued that Hanno only got as far as Sierra Leone, while others placed the end of his expedition near what is now Cameroon or modern-day Gabon. In any case, the Carthaginian sailors didn't have compasses. They did all of this with only the stars to guide them. So how did Hanno and his fleet get back to Carthage? Well, we don't know. since the account ends with Hanno's supplies running out. There are parts of the account missing, and the much later manuscript that survives is an imperfect copy of the inscription. But the Carthaginians somehow did return home, since the commemorative inscription was placed in a temple of Baal in Carthage. Some historians point to the lack of archaeological traces of Carthaginian presence, as possibly suggesting that this account is more myth than reality, but come on, this is a coastal area where conditions are not ideal for preserving such a small Carthaginian footprint, and subsequent ancient Greek accounts imply that trade continued at least as far as Mauritania. I think Hanno the Navigator absolutely deserves to be remembered as a pioneer of ancient exploration. His expedition covered an incredible distance with only the most basic of navigational means. Was Pytheas the first Arctic explorer? In the 4th century BC, this ancient Greek sailor went on a sea voyage worthy of a Homeric poem. Pytheas was a sailor and merchant of pretty modest means from Massalia, what is now Marseille, France. And even in his own day, his account of a voyage to Britain in the semi-mythical northland of Thule was already being questioned. Unfortunately, only fragments of Pytheas' account survive, and mostly in the form of critiques and comments and excerpts from other ancient writers. Of course, it should be pointed out that the toughest critics of Pytheas may have just been jealous. They were explorers too in many cases. Pytheas began his journey possibly by traveling overland across France from Marseille to present-day Bordeaux, or by sailing west from Marseille and through the Strait of Gibraltar. Some scholars believe that the Carthaginians may have effectively blockaded the Western Mediterranean at this time. That would have made an overland route necessary for Pytheas. It's not always clear when and where Pytheas was traveling on land or sailing along the coasts, but it does seem that one possible purpose of his journey was to explore the coastline of the Iberian Peninsula, which would have made sense for a merchant because Iberia was notable for its wealth in precious metals like tin and copper, silver, and gold. With local assistance, Pytheas eventually made it to Cornwall, where there were more tin mines, and from there he traveled north along the western coast of Britain. He went all the way to the northern coast of Scotland, and then he kept going north, sailing for a week until he perhaps reached a land called Thule. This was a place where Pytheas said there is no night during summer, and during the winter, he learned that there was no day. And even more interesting, there was a frozen sea nearby, just a day's sail away. And this all seemed laughable to some ancient writers, but here Pytheas bolstered his scientific reputation, because another ancient source mentions that Pytheas observed the changing tides were connected to lunar cycles. This would make Pytheas the first ancient writer that we know of to have connected the tides and moon. So maybe we should give a little more credit to Pytheas' other accounts then. But what was the actual location of this far northern land that Pytheas cited? He said it was the northernmost of the British Isles, but that could have meant any island north of modern-day Britain. So there are two main theories on this. The Thule of Pytheas could be Iceland or it could be Norway. There are references that suggest that Pytheas was describing a people living close to a frozen zone while cultivating certain fruits and raising domesticated animals. That might point to the coast of Norway, since at the time of Pytheas, it was inhabited by an indigenous Scandinavian people. We can't know for sure at this point where exactly Pytheas ended up, but whether it was Iceland or Norway, this was a groundbreaking voyage of exploration. What lay west of Han China's borders? Around 139 BC, the new Han emperor wanted to know, so he sent an ambassador to find out. A young man named Zhang Qian, along with 100 soldiers, set out from the empire to explore the west and possibly form an alliance with the nomadic Yu Ji against a common enemy, the Xiongnu, who lay directly to Han China's north. The Xiongnu and their mounted archers had long threatened Han China's northern border. All Zhang Qian had to do was cross the Gobi Desert, scale a few mountain ranges, and eventually find the Yu Ji. But Qin's entourage didn't get very far. He and his men were soon captured by the Xiongnu, and Zhang Qian was taken to their king, where the Chinese ambassador must have made a pretty decent impression since they decided not to kill him. Instead of killing him, they gave him a wife, and Qin even had a son with her and lived among his emperor's enemies for 10 years, until his captors apparently relaxed just enough that Qin was able to escape and continue his mission west. Qin then finally made it to Bactria, and there he came into contact with the Yu Ji. They had recently moved into the area, displacing the Greco-Bactrian kingdom. The remnants of that kingdom had moved farther south into India. The Xiongnu had defeated the Yuji in a great battle, and they'd then turned the head of the Yuji king into a drinking cup. They had forced the Yuji into a long migration, but now the Yuji weren't too interested in revenge since they had new and fertile lands in Bactria. So even though the first purpose of Zhang Qian's mission was a failure, and he couldn't form an alliance with this nomadic people, he stayed in the region of Bactria for a year, and he traveled around and he collected all the information he could about the area and its neighbors. He also made note of the people's customs. He saw the tough, much coveted, blood-sweating horses. These were horses that were so prized for their awesome endurance and strength that a war would eventually be fought over them, but that's a story for a different video. He also described a flourishing trade of exotic goods in Central Asia, and curiously enough, he discovered that some Chinese goods were already for sale in Bactrian markets. Qian also compiled a report on India, which he described as a hot and damp land where people rode elephants and a great kingdom lay on a mighty river. And this is where it gets beyond fascinating, because Qian learned about the Parthian Empire, which was even farther west in modern-day Iran. This empire would prove to be one of Rome's fiercest opponents. Qian writes about the great Parthian king and conqueror Mithridates I, and Qian also wrote about the great walled cities of Parthia, about Babylon and the customs in Mesopotamia. He tasted wine made from grapes for the first time. The Chinese had wine before, but only different kinds made from rice up until that point. And Qian also learned about lands as far away as Syria. So Qian's reports on Parthia and Bactria mark the first time that events and persons are recorded by both ancient Western and ancient Chinese historians. How cool is that? Qian was like a bridge linking West and East together, but he still had to get home so he could deliver these amazing reports he'd compiled and show off some of these different goods and wares that he'd sampled. So on his way back, Qian took a different, more southern route back to Han China, but he was still captured again by the Xiongnu, although this time he was able to make his escape in less than a year. Now, by this time, 13 years had passed, and the Han Emperor had naturally given up Qian for dead. So it was absolutely miraculous when Qian appeared at the Han imperial court with his wife and son and an incredible story to tell. The emperor wasn't even bothered about the whole alliance thing falling through. He was so overjoyed by all the information that Qian had compiled, and he could now see that there was a vast commercial potential that lay to China's west. Qian had brought back essentially limitless markets for Chinese goods. And as Qian had traveled, he had opened lines of communication and he'd made agreements with countless peoples. So Qian was covered in honors and he rose to the top government posts. And soon after, Chinese traders were regularly traveling between the continents to exchange goods along the paths and routes that were similar to Qian's. Those routes formed one of history's greatest networks of commercial exchange, what we now call the Silk Road. I'm just blown away by Qian's story, to be held captive for 10 years and still keep going, to cover thousands of miles on foot and on horse, only to reach your destination, and then spend another year just reporting and absorbing as much information as possible. It's incredible to think about today. And then on your way home, to be kidnapped again, but still somehow he managed to survive and escape and complete his mission and make it back to China with knowledge of a literal new world. I mean, that's something else. So if you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing so we can share our passion for ancient history with even more people. My name is Jay, and I'll see you next time.